This is Resolute and the Resolute Leadership Podcast. I'm Vince Miller, your founder and host, and today we're in a series we have entitled From Addiction to Freedom. Today we're discussing the topic of humility. Men, welcome back to the program. If this is, in fact, your very first time tuning in, then thank you for joining us. Our mission is to disciple and develop men to lead. So if you're looking for content for your men's small group or men's ministry, then you need to go to our website today at beresolute.org. We have a number of great tools for men who are leading other men, including some new men's Bible studies that we know that you would love for your men's group. But now let's dive in. Well, guys, today I am joined again by Joel Carlson. Joel is just one guy who's trying to move from addiction to freedom in his own life. And today we're looking at the topic of humility. Joel, welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you, Vince.
So we're looking today at the latter part of your phrase, I can't, he can, and I'm going to let him. And we're looking at the word humility. Key word for any guy in life, Joel. Not just guys just struggling to move from addiction to freedom, but guys just dealing with the difficulties of life. And every guy needs more humility, every one of us. But I know that it was tough for you to learn the importance of humility in your recovery. Can you share with the guys why that was? And I think that's so important for them to hear. Why is humility, was that hard for you to learn?
Well, I'm Exhibit A when it comes to the opposite of humility. When I was in my worst moments.
Is that really true, though? Were you really... Would you say that maybe this thing built up in your life? Were you always a proud person, or would you call yourself arrogant? I don't know, but were you always that way, or did you build into it?
Oh, I think I built into it, but I think as we talked about earlier on the insecurity portion of my life that was driving me, because that insecurity got bigger and bigger and more enhanced, the arrogance and the pride really took over my life as really a facade as to really who I wanted to be. But
and then it became hard to unlearn all that stuff, right?
Because in my eyes, it was working. People were buying into this, fake Joel that was out there. And the only way I could, justify it was saying, I continue to be arrogant, be prideful, be better. And so, humility just went out the door. The thing about humility that people often get confused about is they want to throw the word humiliation into humility. And those two words are very, very different. And there was a very good friend of mine from prison, very strong in his recovery, a person that I really looked up to. And he said this quote often, and he would say, humiliation is thinking less of yourself. Humility is thinking of yourself less. And that's really the true definition of humility, is just thinking of yourself less, putting others before yourself, and doing the best you can to, no matter what your circumstances are, just be grateful for it, be thankful for where you're at, and don't expect anything more than what you're getting. And it just spews out all this contentment and joy when you can live a life of humility. And that's something that I really, really had to learn was crucial in my walk to restoration.
Okay, so you're making a really great delineation here, Joel, and I think it's super important. What I'm hearing you say is that you can unlearn humility. You have to relearn humility, and you can also confuse true humility with humiliation.
Right.
And I think some guys think that humility is shaming yourself, but that's not really what it is. It's like you said, humiliation is thinking less of yourself. Humility is thinking of yourself less. So you're just changing the order of words a little bit, but it sets in place a new mindset. But from your standpoint, this may be a little hard to answer, but how did you learn the second part of that? How did you learn to think of yourself less over time? Because this was something you said you had to relearn.
I had to, in my situation, I had to get humiliated to figure out how to be humble.
So there is humiliation might be part of it.
Right.
It might be coming to your senses, coming to the end of yourself,
Yeah.
and then kind of being disappointed in yourself so that you could discover how to rebuild a new you.
Exactly. But I did that humiliation part in a healthy way through a treatment facility, through talking with counselors and experts about me and kind of unwrapping who I was. So it was very humiliating.
Of course.
But it then taught me the importance of being humble. And some really neat steps took place for me that I really didn't plan. But the fun part is that doing it was teaching me that, wow, I am really learning humility. The first one was, when I left treatment, I had no career. I didn't have a job, and I needed to do something. I had to work. And being about to be convicted felon, having now a backstory that wasn't pretty, I knew that finding a job was going to be tough, especially finding a job knowing that I was going to have to leave that job to go and serve my time in prison. And I applied at various places, and I landed at a coffee shop where I applied for a job, and they hired me. They knew my story, and they said, we'll take you in. And I worked there for about a year before I went to prison. And I tell you what, working in now an environment where I was being bossed instead of being the boss, where I was having to work with a team instead of being the manager of the team, and then working with customers that some used to be my clients, many were friends that knew my story, where the whole image of Joel and who he once was, fake as it may be, that was still the selling point that I had given them. Now he's behind the counter serving them coffee, and I don't minimize that, but that's exactly what I was doing. I was now in a flipped role. I tell you what, I felt so much peace, so much joy, and so much contentment doing that job. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about other people and how much value other people can bring to my life. Most of my coworkers were half my age, and to work with people that could be my kids it was interesting and fun, and I learned so much from them. And I learned the value of just being humble. And when I can stick in that mode, it takes a lot of mysteries out of my life and makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, so I remember, Joel, that's where I first met you.
Right.
Was at the coffee shop and got to interact with you a little bit and had heard pieces of your story, didn't know the whole story at that moment. That was before incarceration.
Right.
You were attending one of our groups, and I was just excited to hear how you were working through it, but I didn't know you were processing this at that stage. And you know what? It's great to hear from you that, look, you had to move from boss to servant, and there's nothing wrong with that job.
Nope.
It just teaches you a different perspective on life, which teaches you to kind of relearn things all over again, right? And it sounds like there's a long process sometimes of relearning how we view ourselves, how we view the world, how we view people, and we have to unlearn to relearn, what true humility really means. Now, this is kind of a trick question,
Okay.
so stay with me for a second.
All right.
Do you feel that you are a humble person?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not so much a trick question as a good question. I'm a much more humble person.
Yeah. Good answer.
Yeah,
And maybe you get there quicker than you used to.
and I think
right?
I will. I find myself still wanting to be in control. I find myself thinking that I know more than other people do. I'm no longer at the coffee shop. I've moved on to working in recovery now, which is also humbling in its own right. But I am definitely on the road of being a very humble person, and there's so many steps that have to be taken to get there. And one of those is just being really honest about my story and especially to the people that I've directly affected. And I've been able to do that over time is talk to specific people that I hurt,
Yeah.
and to seek forgiveness. And a part of doing that amends and working through that process is just unloading the whole story and saying, this is what I did. This is what I did to you. And then showing empathy to them. This is how it must have made you feel.
Yeah.
To have to do that is hard.
There's a little bit of humiliation in there,
Ton of
right?
humiliation in there, but it is a humbling process. And I even joke with my wife often when we talk about how we met, and we met at the coffee shop too. But our first date was spent with me telling her my entire story. Now, that's not a typical first date, where you're telling about your crimes and your failed marriage and the poor choices that you made. And man,
Right.
but again, being able to do that was so humbling, but it was also so freeing to do that as well, because it just, like I said, it takes away any mysteries or any surprises by just being who you are. And we've talked about acceptance so much along these podcasts, and the cool thing about it is if I can just say, this is who I am today, because of what I did, this is who I am today, very honestly, and this is not the ego arrogant side of me coming out, this is just the honest portion of me, I couldn't be happier with who I am today. Even though I did so many terrible things, I know that the person I am today is who I am supposed to be, and by being humble, that is one of the main reasons why.
Yeah. So let's tie this together now so that the men out there listening can really gain an understanding of the process. Yeah. It's probably, humility is a hard path to walk down. It's different for every person because we have different triggers that trigger our pride and diminish humility. For you, it was things like control and knowing better and dishonesty that developed your pride. You had to unlearn those prideful triggers, and you had to discover what it looked like to give up control by letting other people be in control of your schedules. You had to give up knowing better by serving at a coffee shop, right?
Right.
You had to give up being dishonest by being honest. And through those three things and maybe more, you learned or relearned what humility looked like in your life, and therefore are becoming more like Christ. I love the words from Philippians 2, verse 3, and I know that Philippians has become a key text for you.
Yeah, love
Maybe because Paul was in prison, maybe.
Yep.
Maybe because Paul learned some great lessons from his own arrogance in his previous life. But how about this one? Philippians 2:3, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Great verse, right?
Yeah.
And I think for you, this has been a key verse.
The key to this verse for me is the last part. Count others more significant than yourselves. And, marriage 101, what I was taught was always strive to outserve your spouse. And I didn't do that at all in my first marriage. But I think that's a life lesson for how we just look at everyone around us, is if we strive to look at them and their needs, their opinions, their thoughts, more so than our own, if we stop getting wrapped up in all the things we think are the right things to do, and we just consider other people first, it's just much easier to start being more humble by doing that.
There you go. There's the actionable right there. It's not only discover the things that are triggering your pride, it's just think of others more and think of yourself less. Think of others more and think of yourself less. Boy, Joel, I think we can all admit that we all think of ourselves a lot. Yeah. It's perhaps our favorite subject, ourselves, but maybe we just need to listen more and think of others more. I mean, really think of them, think of them before we even think of ourselves. Right. Well, thanks again, Joel, for being with us.
Thank you, Vince.
Well, guys, that's our show. Thanks for listening. As we close today, I want to remind you that we have great content for your men's group. Great men's Bible studies that we know that you would enjoy, that include small group videos and participant handbooks that empower men to lead and equip them to build the men around them. Check it all out at beresolute.org, or you can just send me a direct email at info@beresolute.org. And guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast today, but please know that the time that we spent together is worthless. Worthless. It means nothing unless you act on it. Find your way to humility and do something today by getting off the bench and into the game. And I'll see you right back here next time on another edition of the Resolute Podcast.